Hey, hey everybody! It's Adam Swan with SOC Prime. I'm going to be here with Nate Guagenti in a moment, but about information security. We'll also be going over the answers to the last two challenges that we presented, and finally, of course, talking about the Solarwinds compromise and the leak of Fireeye tools. So let's just get into it. So again, every month we propose a new challenge to everyone or present a new challenge to everyone, and it's hosted on my personal GitHub here, aclarc/challenges. And congratulations to Seminar Ganisu, hopefully I didn't butcher that too bad, who won the challenge number 3. And let's go over the solution. So this was a challenge presented in November, and basically there's a base64 encoded Python script that contains a secret message if you provide the correct password. So we'll take a look at the script in a second, but just to give you an overview of what we're going to be doing or looking at, the script just first it accepts a password, and then the script will be modifying that password by adding some static values to each character. So the first static value I think is like 13 or something like that. So if you have the character A, it takes the like the decimal value of that character and then adds 13 to it. And then it loops through each character and does this. So once it finishes that modification, it compares the modified password to a stored value to see if the password was correct. And if it is, it decodes the secret message. So the weakness is in how they're doing the password verification, or how, in the challenge, how I created the password verification, which is basically the password is essentially stored in the script. So you can just undo the subtraction or the addition via subtraction and get the values that will lead you to the plain text password. So the plain text password, as we'll see, was happy tea giving. So let's take a look here. Share Visual Studio. One moment. All right. So once you decode the base64, you get this script effectively. Now I've added some additional comments in here to help us guide through it. But basically, here's where we get the password. And here's where we get the numerical values for each character in the password. And we store them in a list called secret. And then this is the static value that will be added to each character, and it's done in a loop. So basically, for each character in the secret, add 13. So the first character will be added, we'll have 13 added to it, then 21 for the second, 17 for the third, so on. The seventh, it loops back around, so the seventh character will be, or the eighth character will be added, we'll have 13 added to it again until the whole secret is encoded. And then once that occurs, it breaks out of this loop, and then it compares the user's secret with a stored value. And this stored value is basically the actual password that's encoded with this same encoding. So you can just subtract each one of these values from it and get the password. So you can do that manually, or you can script it out. So I have the script that I wrote to do this, and we'll go through that. So here's the password that has been encoded, and here are the static values that it was kind of encoded with. And first thing we're doing is just looping through the check and subtracting each one of these values. from it in its ordinate. So once you do that, you just have to print it out, basically. So I take the numeric here that we obtain from doing the subtraction and place it back into its character type and then print it. So we should just be able to run Python challenge 3 answer.py, and as it runs, you can see that it prints out happy tac giving. So that's the answer, and we'll also be going over another challenge since 2 were finished. So let's go back to that. And we go full screen here. So the challenge 2 winner was Dev Dua. So check them out on Twitter or give them a shout out for winning. That'd be cool. So this one was presented in September, so this one took a little bit longer to answer, but I think it was probably a little bit easier actually of a challenge. And in this challenge, there's a base64. Well, it's compressed and base64 encoded PCAP file, and we're just asking what's the exploit's CVE. So the exploit has a vulnerability associated with it, and what's the CVE for that vulnerability, and then just some basic other questions about it. What are the attacker's IP? What's the victim's IP? And then was the exploit successful? So the final question there is probably the most difficult to answer, but it's also either it was or was not successful. So maybe I should have asked, and why was it or was it not successful? So if you're not familiar with how to use this sort of chef recipe, you can just go to chef and hit this plus symbol, and that will allow you to load. You hit this this folder button right here, and that allows you to load a recipe, and you can paste the one that I left in the challenge there, and then paste the base64 encoded blob, and you can kind of see, if you're familiar at all with PCAP, that this is a PCAP. So you just hit save, export the PCAP, and then you can look at it in something like Wireshark. So that's what you should have done potentially. There's other ways to solve this challenge. Like you could have probably run it through Suricata or run it through something like Zeek and analyzed it that way. But a lot of people use Wireshark. So we're going to be going over the answer in Wireshark. But there's not one correct way to do it. So you can see that there's in Wireshark, if you just look at the PCAP, you'll see that there's a bunch of net logon TCP streams. So I just picked one here at random and took a look at it, and you can see that there are these net server request challenges, and there's net server authenticate requests being sent to a host 129.10.0.0.129. So if we take a look further at this, we can see that this net server request challenge always has the challenge is always all zeros, and we can see that there's a whole lot of them. So there's 233 in this PCAP attempts to use this challenge function with a client challenge of all zeros. And so if we just Google this function or this operation, you should get some interesting results. For instance, 0 logon right here is the number 3 result today. So that should give you a good idea of maybe what the exploit is going to be. So then you can actually go out and find on GitHub, there's a bunch of POCs now. You can just pick one and start reading through the code. And you can see that there's an error code here, C000022. And if this is the error code, that means the attempt was unsuccessful. So if you actually go back through and look at the PCAP for the Net Server Authenticate 3 requests, then you'll see that this C000022 is the only response that is ever received. So that means that the attack was actually unsuccessful. So we know it's 0 logon based off of the number of attempts and the type of attempts that were made. And we know that the target was 129 and the attacker was 10.0.0.128. And that's how you answer that question. So, CVE number is 2020-11472. We know the 128 and 29 IPs, and then the exploit was actually not successful in this instance. So, like I said, every month we release a new challenge, and that's true for this month as well. So let's go take a look at what's out there. So this challenge, the challenge number 4, is basically functionally equivalent to challenge number 3, except this time the author, myself, I've improved the password check. So that old technique from challenge number 3 isn't going to work anymore, and you'll have to use a new method of figuring out what the password was. So definitely pay attention to these 2 hints, as they will get you a lot 80% of the way there if you understand what they mean. So that's challenge number 4. And let's go back. Hey, Nate, were you able to join us?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Is there a scratchy record this time?
No, yeah. Sorry about that last time, folks. This time we fixed Nate's audio, so hopefully there's nothing else annoying. But if there is, please put it in the QA, and we'll see it. So thank you. And again, like with our other presentations, the slides will be posted to the LinkedIn invitation after the talk. A link to the slides will be available. So let's talk about talking about too much information security. This week and last week, this has been the Solarwinds gate / Fireeye gate. Supply chain compromise is a huge deal. So if you're not familiar for whatever reason, if you've been living in a shoebox, or maybe you just have some passive interest in InfoSec and you're doing something else, the Solarwinds compromise, they believe it to be a compromise of the build cycle for Solarwinds, one of their utilities, where basically an adversary was able to alter a DLL and use some pretty sophisticated and evasive techniques there to allow them to drop additional malware on hosts. So they did some basic checks like, is it connected to a domain or not? Is it being run in a sandbox or not? Stuff like that. But as we all know, this was how Fireeye believes that they, or reports that they were compromised. And then there has just been, as the days go on, a lot of reporting about other victims of this. So I think the government, United States government, has come out and said several orgs have been compromised, but also there's a lot that haven't been, right? Because private companies that are afraid, for their stock values to plummet, so they don't want to come out and say it right away. So they're probably holding their cards. But that's kind of for the community. It's kind of harmful because this Solarwinds compromise is so huge. And the likelihood that the actor who did it had access to so many corporations is quite large. Like they probably had access to over 1,000 corporations. So to me, that means that the likelihood of there just being one team that was doing post exploitation is probably pretty low, right? So what does that mean? If there's more than one team likely doing the post exploitation, it probably means that there's multiple behaviors that haven't been reported on for this SolarWinds compromise. So the main dropper that Fireeye reported on is going to be, those indicators are going to be true for everyone, but the secondary stuff it isn't, so it might not be the same. The only folks who kind of have been reporting on what that post exploitation might look like really is Velexity outside of Fireeye and a little bit from Microsoft. So these are like the main links that I would recommend you read if you haven't already. And then for countermeasures, Fireeye released a bunch of IOCs, and some of those IOCs were in what's called HX IOC format, and it's basically like a Fireeye internal open IOC format, and those can be converted. Thanks Fireeye for making the licensing of that to be so broad. So basically, as long as we give them follow their licensing, which is basically just putting the license in the rule, we're able to translate this into a more open format like Sigma. So that's what that was the role that SOC Prime played in this. On Sunday, the second it was dropped, Nate and I started converting all these into behavioral detections, and there's some IOCs in here too. So there's 6 rules that are completely free, and then 5 exclusive rules that are not based off of Fireeye's HXIOC format and are based off of personal research or internal research at SOC Prime. And so those are available to our paid customers, but there are 6 out there that are free for everyone to use. Yeah, so, I wanted to bring up. Yeah, go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, somebody asked, like, if the compromise was all the way back in March, how you check for persistence. So yeah, hopefully you have the right logs, right? Like you're collecting DNS logs or proxy logs. If you have the ability, something like process creation or PowerShell logs. But I mean, just a simple, since this wasn't using so many domains for sort of its base thing, like hunting, or I guess say hunting, but just retroactively searching is not difficult in this scenario, right? Like some of the TDM rules, we have one for Zeek SSL certificates if you're collecting that, but more so probably just DNS or proxy web server requests, and then to just essentially run that query for as far back as the data you have. So that's pretty much the simplest answer I can give. Or running the IOCs for IP addresses, like if you have NetFlow or again Zeek or Suricata, or even just firewall logs for permit. Hopefully not just you only have deny. But
yeah, to add to what Nate said, like in case your logs have rolled, which is probably the case for most individuals since this goes back so far, you inside of this, I can't remember it from exactly from memory, but if you take a look at the Fireeye log, there is a Windows event log related to the kernel, and it's basically where if a file fails some signature validations, it gets logged there. And there is a DLL, I forget the exact name of it, but if you look in that log on your endpoints, it's likely that that log will still be there because that log is not written to that often. So go ahead and take a look at the Fireeye research here and see if that log is enabled in your environment. Probably is, and there's probably events going back that far. So that's my recommendation there, especially if your logs have rolled. But again, there hasn't been a lot of sharing beyond these core resources here to look where people are saying, hey, we also saw X, Y, or Z indicators. So
yeah, somebody else asked, like, they said they don't have Solarwinds, but how they protect from such type of compromise. So again, I mean, I guess just a realization you're not going to block everything, especially, you know, like this kind of shows that, right? Like, for once, it's not an email compromise or a web server compromise. It's a backdoor of legitimate software. So first, a realization that you're going to get compromised. So you give up, no, like you do as much as you can for running least privilege of this type of software. If you can't, right, you monitor your monitoring. So it's a combination of prevention and then the monitoring of all the scenarios, or the monitoring of the scenarios where prevention isn't possible, or you don't believe it's good enough, or you should just do some sort of monitoring in general, right? So like, you can't just will, like somebody said, you can't just will your way onto a box. Like, it's not magic. Even in scenarios where they'll use 0 days and everything else, they're going to create a log. So whether you're able to protect all the computers, like if they get on one box, hopefully they'll create a log moving to another box or moving to another server or another device. Like in this case, monitoring, there was a lot of possibilities for monitoring, whether it was Zeek data that we're going to be writing some rules around soon for just a general tactic of moving laterally, or just using PowerShell, creating processes, using Office 365 API. Like, it goes back to the whole cycle of what's important to your network, the bottom dollar, like what's important to the business. Do you have intellectual property? Do you sell, you know, are you point of sale system? Like, what is important, and then protect those and detect on those assets. Like, it's not always necessary to protect every single computer, nor is it possible, right? Like, have as much as you can for the assets that are important. I always go back to the story of, this is a casino company, right? That point of sale system servers were compromised. They had 2 point of sale system servers. Like, you know, you could literally hire somebody to just, every time a new process is created, to say something. Like, the compromise was 8 random alphanumeric process.exe. So do I blame them? No, I'm just saying, like, you could probably help yourself a lot by focusing on what is important to your environment, whether that's intellectual property, like I said, or whatever public facing web server has access to a backend database. So
yeah, and just to add to that, if you look at the HXIOC rules that Fireeye wrote, you'll see that there's a pattern there, and that pattern is that these rules are looking for things that stagger from normal activities. So just like Nate said, you know, anytime a process is executed, well, you can also go out and say, take an inventory of the software that's used in your environment, especially software like Solarwinds, which has access, you know, per its feature set, per its, you know, use case to basically a lot of stuff in your environment. So baseline what those software look like in your environment, baseline what their, SolarWinds launching command.exe, is that normal? SolarWinds launching PowerShell.exe, is that something I should be concerned about? So if you take a look at these rules, they're basically looking for differences from what would be normal activity. So SolarWinds mimicking, that rule is looking for URIs that look like SolarWinds URIs but aren't to the SolarWinds domain. SolarWinds file creation is looking for SolarWinds creating EXEs, DLLs, or PE files, PowerShell files, batch files, etc. So you can do that ahead of time for those critical pieces of software that have a lot of privilege in your environment as well. And go ahead of time. I know that personally, this is something that, as a content creator, I've been thinking about heavily in the last couple days of how can we write content like this for other pieces of software in the future. Recently, we wrote a rule like this for Teams, and we wrote some rules for other video conferencing software when coronavirus hit, because everyone was moving to these pieces of software. So just another idea for you, baseline what's normal for these pieces of critical software in your environment.
Yeah, I mean, this one was just hard.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
There's not. Yeah. I mean, even the documentation is telling people, like from EDR, that's going to monitor some of the process creation to exclude entire directories and everything else like that. Again, like, what the servers outside of SolarWinds, devices outside of SolarWinds, like, had logs, right? But the initial foothold and everything else like that, like, it's almost as if nobody had any chance. But again, it's like you have to move to another box. You can't just. I still haven't seen it like 0 day into memory and then 0 day into memory in another place, all over the place, and then I guess compromise Office 365 and still not create a log. Like, that doesn't happen. So again, it's just assume, compromise, monitor what you can.
Yeah.
But this one was just, I couldn't imagine working on the incident response. It's not gotta be fun.
Yeah. But despite the sophistication, right? If you read the Velexity, even if you read the Fireeye, they did at times use things that we can detect on, such as PowerShell, process creation. So again, the supply chain part of this is, only the initial access. Once they get access, they generally have some sort of active actions on objective that they want to reach, and to do that, like Nate said, there's other logs created. So I think we've more than spent more than enough time on SolarWinds. So let's talk about the Fireeye tools. And this is very similar to SolarWinds. Basically, Fireeye, one of the premier incident response threat detection sort of companies out there. They were compromised by this SolarWinds actor, and they released. The actor didn't release their tools, but Fireeye is reporting that they were able to access their tools, and as a preemptive strike to help organizations out before the tools may or may not be released, they released indicators as well in the form of those HXIOCs. And once again, SOC Prime converted all these, or SOC Prime, and also I should say the threat detection developers, or the threat bounty program developers, helped us write a lot of these. So now there are actually 51 rules, and 48 of them are behavioral, so detecting behaviors of the red team tools or methodologies that the red team tools use, and 3 are more IOC based, where we're either looking for maybe the exact match of a red team tool name or a hash. So again, all of these are free with a community edition. All you need is a work email to sign up, and you can get access to them. So,
Adam, somebody asked, what are your predictions of the long-term implications of the breach? I guess like it could be, pretty vast. Who knows for how long? Like, could get potentially even backdoor other software, or just be sitting quietly in other environments. Like people ask like why they would hack Fireeye. I don't know if this is why or not, right? But thinking on how hard it is to do incident response, and let's say Fireeye is usually the one who does incident response on the vast majority of breaches. Like it's almost smart to, if you're the attacker, breach Fireeye or try, right, and spin up their entire incident response team or the vast majority of their incident response team to like prevent them from responding to other incidents, almost as like a disrupt sort of tactic. But that was just one thing I had kind of thought of. But the long-term implications, who knows? Like it's the same long-term implications of when China breached OPM. Like we don't know directly. There's probably people out there in certain government environments that know like what were the implications of that breach. We can only imagine, right? But an implication of a breach like OPM, the U.S. basically clearance information, people's credit history, whose family lives in certain countries and things like that, lasts for a really long time, So the implications, like, it's kind of, I guess, scary to think about, especially since we don't know and probably won't know. But
yeah, pretty much. I agree with Nate and entirely. Like we really we don't know. I guess like based off of the actors, Dark Halo, like previous activity, they generally are pretty quiet. So I wouldn't imagine to see some sort of major intellectual property dumps like we did see with Guccifer or something like that from the election hacks. So we probably won't see anything like that, I would guess, but really you don't know. So
yeah,
that would be the only thing I have to add.
Or they just wait. Like there's a lot of like tactic in spinning people up, spinning the media up, or making people like misdirection or like focus on something that doesn't matter. So, I mean, it's more than possible. And even, I mean, I don't, kind of on a tangent, but on the Equifax, like, and this goes, people have kind of thought about, was this potentially an insider in Solarwinds? Like, insider isn't really talked about much except for outside of like the Department of Defense. And when you have a clearance, like you go through a background check, and the biggest thing is like credit history. Like, are you essentially blackmailable? Like, can somebody buy you for a price? So I think it's kind of interesting looking at something like a credit bureau breach. Like, I don't know exactly what they're doing with that data, but like if I'm able to find people that work in certain organizations that have a really bad credit history or have a lot of debt, they're a lot more susceptible to accepting money than anybody else. And that sort of vetting process isn't done as vastly or as in depth as like in the government. It's still people in the government, in the U.S., like accept bribes all the time, So I imagine that sort of stuff is happening in the public sector just as much, the private sector just as much, So it's interesting, the whole thing. So
Yeah. So maybe we'll save other questions to the end if we have some time.
Yeah.
But keep sending them, and we'll keep trying to make sense of them and have some insight. So thank you for the questions. So the topic at hand, really, we notice that perhaps a majority of the audience here is new to cybersecurity or trying to break into the field of cybersecurity, which is great. And we wanted to tailor some guidance or this talk to you, the main portion of our monthly talk here. So basically too much information security is the title of it, because if you get into cybersecurity with the amount of changes and things that happen, like welcome to too much information security. You'll be this sort of Solarwinds type stuff happens more often than it should, and you know, especially if you're in a SOC, like the questions are going to keep coming. So if you had to write a report in one day all of a sudden for everything about SolarWinds that you didn't even know was being used in your organization, that is kind of the expected state of cybersecurity today. So welcome to the field. But overall, we just want to give an overview of where we come from, you know, share our human nature and the mistakes we've made, and just generally give some advice, and then also maybe tie in some of our experiences with relevant high profile compromises or targeting that we've been a part of the response for, without getting into too much details. So as much detail as we can legally, I guess. So I'm going to start off. So how did I get into cybersecurity? When I was in high school, I took some web programming classes, and when that happened, I thought I knew everything I needed to know about programming. So when I was looking at college degrees, I was like, security sounds interesting. So that was really it. Like, I didn't have much experience with computer security before then, other than when I was like 5 or 6 years old, I wanted to be a hacker. So I would open up Word, literally like Microsoft Word, and just start typing as fast as I could, all random characters, and pretending that I was hacking. But until college, I didn't have any experience. No one, unfortunately, I wish someone would have seen that I was interested in computers and kind of guided me down a path when I was a kid of learning more about them, but that didn't happen. And I had to learn it all starting in college. So got a degree in information security, and it was very process-based, not so much the technical. There were technical classes in there, but it was mostly about building out an incident, or building out a security program, you know, kind of like CISO level things, or like things that you would find on the CISP exam, for instance. And so I was kind of sold on that idea when I got out of college. I got very lucky, actually. Someone, a close friend of mine at the time, actually turned down a job and told the employer, hey, you should talk to Adam. So don't discount luck, folks. Like, that was how I broke into the field, was basically someone who had 2 job offers, turned one down and said, hey, talk to Adam. And that got me my security clearance, and I was working supporting at the time what was called the Information Technology Agency, and doing auditing. I thought getting into auditing would be more interesting than it was. It turned out to be kind of very paper heavy, and I wasn't actually getting my hands on keyboard doing technical things. So I immediately, when I was within my first year, I got my CEH certification, and I realized after I took it, I didn't know anything. So then I was like, what's the hardest one out there? So I read basically Googled what's the best cert in cybersecurity, and I read about the CISP, and I was like, screw it, I'll take the CISP. So I took the CISP and passed. I got my CISP associates. And after I did that, I realized, okay, I still feel like I don't know anything about cybersecurity. So at the time, the program manager, I was a contractor, and the program manager said, hey, we have this. He noticed that I was, you know, hungry to do more, and he said, hey, we have this junior reverse engineering position. You just need to pass the GREM, which is, at the time, I hadn't even heard of SANS yet, really. And he was like, pass the GREM, and we'll get you basically in the SOC. And that's what happened. I passed the GREM after studying for a few weeks, and I got that job. Well, the contract rolled. If you're familiar with government contracting, contracts roll all the time, and it's generally not a great position to be in, to be a new guy in a new role for just a few weeks, and then the contract rules, it's more difficult to get picked up, for instance, by the new contractor, which happens a lot. So actually, I went to that interview with the new contractor, and they said, "You make how much, and you have how little experience? Okay, next interviewee, please." But luckily, the recruiter fought for me. For some reason, I'm not sure. Like I said, don't discount luck. And I ended up getting hired into that junior RE slot, which actually became more of like a forensics role, and got into forensics there. And then I ended up leaving after a while because I was the newest person there, but I was also probably, the top one or two highest performing SOC analysts there, even though I felt like I was brand new to the field and didn't know anything. So I had started to talk more with Nate, who I worked with before the contract rolled, and he convinced me to join VAE. And he really, like I'll say later in the talk, biggest helpers, completely steered me more in the right direction and made a path more clear. But for whatever reason, I decided, man, I really kind of missed the day-to-day grind of the SOC work, and more activity. I wanted to see more activity, so I actually went back to the SOC I was working for a while, until I realized that that was maybe not the best decision in the world. Left there and became a detection engineer or a threat hunting engineer at SOC Prime. So that's kind of my backstory. And along the way, I've made plenty of mistakes, but the two that I wanted to bring up were the time I approved a IP block that just so happened to be one of the customer's domain controllers. So who needs access to domain controllers? We can just block those, and by accident I did. So the biggest thing about mistakes, obviously, is to learn from them and improve. So you write a script I wrote a script for myself that had all the important IPs and domain names in the environment. And it would at least let me know, like, if I was blocking an IP, hey, this is an internal IP, or a private IP. Where I was working at the time, we had our own public IP space that we were using internally. So you couldn't just say, hey, if it's a 10 dot, don't block it, or if it's a 192, don't block it. It was, there was a lot of possible IP addresses that could be a domain controller and wouldn't just be private. So this probably won't happen to you because you'll just say, hey, this is a private IP, maybe I shouldn't block that. But anyways, the script helped prevent that in the future. And then another time, actually, it's kind of a somber story. Probably the thing that caused me to leave the SOC I was working for the most was a user had plugged in an unauthorized device into a computer, and the customer, it spun up the forensics process. I was the analyst working on the case at the time. And the customer decided to fire the individual before I could finish the forensics report. And the forensics report actually kind of expunged the user, or we were able to prove that actually this device was authorized in an emergency later in the year. And unfortunately, later, quite sad that later that person, through a series of events, losing their job, etc., actually took their own life. So it was very impactful to me. Feel a little teary-eyed just talking about it, and it was rough. It's really rough. So cybersecurity can get very real, and obviously it wasn't my fault, but definitely had a role in the series of events that ended that way. Anyways, on to happier things. Like I said, the biggest helper is like being in the right place at the right time. And you actually do have control over this. If you're not talking to employers or getting your resume out or talking to people in the field, then you're not going to be in the right place at the right time, where someone might say, hey, we're looking for a SOC analyst, or hey, we think you might fit in here, etc. So take on bigger than you can chew challenges. Like I didn't know anything about reverse engineering. I took the GREM, and yeah, it was very tough. It was like 6 weeks. I was sitting on a recliner eating Hershey's Nuggets for like 6 weeks in a row. I think I put on 10 pounds. Read those books like 8 times. Did all the labs like 3 times. Bought all the books I could find on reverse engineering at the time, which actually wasn't that many, and read as many blog posts as I could, and took the exam and passed. And then again, thanks, Nate. You've been probably the biggest influence in my career. Working on the Windows Event Log Talk was awesome, and another one of those challenges that bigger than you can chew type of challenge. So to stay sane.
Did you mention your struggle of companies that haven't treated you the best?
We don't need to get into that.
Yeah. No, there was, before Adam joined SOC Prime, there was company told him he was going to hire him, left his job, and then what? You were backpacking, right? Like you're out hiking, and you got the news that you didn't have a job. So they basically dropped you, like couldn't complete limbo. So I'm glad that happened. I'm sure mentally that was probably stressful, but thankfully that happened because have you here now. So anyways.
Yeah, so talking about hiking, I was out on a hike at the time trying to keep my sanity. And I was out doing Old Rag in Virginia, if you're familiar with that, when that happened. And that's one of the things I love to do. So I go backpacking. The picture you see on the top right of the screen is me in October in Shenandoah National Park doing some solo backpacking. And the picture there at the bottom left is actually 495 if you're in the DC region. That's underneath 495. There's the Northwest Branch Trail runs under there, and I am a trail steward or a trail ranger for that trail. I help maintain it and report down trees and stuff like that. So I'm out there quite a bit. So if you're ever on the Northwest Branch Trail and you see me, don't be afraid to say hello. And on the right there, that's the picture I'm using for my family. That's my new puppy, but obviously love visiting and talking with my family as much as possible. Unfortunately, with coronavirus, that's been more difficult. And then finally, like the biggest thing to help me sleep at night is YouTube. I put on something like Nile Red or some other technology or chemistry, physics YouTube channels, and stuff that's just like just outside of my understanding. And I put it on, and it kind of helps me relax and have my ears focus on something and fall asleep. So that's been a huge thing for me over the last couple of years. Once I identified that it helped me fall asleep, like my sleep has improved tenfold, because I used to run my brain every night, like thinking about work or thinking about personal problems. But now that like has almost, it's better than sleeping aids for me at least. And then high profile compromise experience. Again, can't really get into specifics with this, but I would say that I have been a part of high profile compromises, ones that made national television. And the biggest takeaway from that is if you are a part of these, prepare for a flood of help. The amount of people that will come knocking on your door asking or wanting to help you, it will be enormous, and they will all have 1,000 questions. So it's a good idea right away, if you think that this is going to be something that you experience, is to set up a way to communicate with all of these people at once and make it who you agree to work with, and make it as efficient as possible. So that's all I can really get into there.
And I guess be wary of the people who want something from you. Right?
Yeah, a lot of those people. So a lot of that's why I put the help in quotes, because a lot of those people will I don't want to point at any specific organizations, but some organizations will take everything and not ever get back to you about what their findings were. It happens. So
I think we've heard that enough to know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I'll say not. Maybe I won't say. So never mind.
Yeah, don't say it.
Yeah.
It's a good idea not to say it.
All right. I think these takeaways basically, they're already covered, but they'll be in the slide for you if that's interesting to you. And now it's off to Nate.
Yeah. So, my career path. I think me and Adam couldn't be any different. I think personality, background. I think there's a lot on the surface that we share in common, but I think that's what's made it, really great working with him. Adam's always somebody who's reliable and very detail oriented and asks questions and those sort of things. I guess my focus has always been on the next thing or a bigger picture sometimes, or maybe taking on things that are too much. But Adam's it's been nice working with him. I guess I'm jumping to biggest helpers, but always been nice working with him to help with those monumental tasks. I always end up around the same people when I take those on. So, but in terms of background, ours couldn't be any different. So my route is self-taught. I guess I took a high school career center sort of path towards the end of my high school. I was 17 or 18, but I finished that in a fourth of the time, and then mine jumps into luck. I finished a fourth of my time because I kind of separated from the class and just did it myself versus waiting for the teacher to teach it. But luck, my brother owned an IT company, so he gave me a job, right? But goes beyond that because, some way, shape, or form, you're going to get an opportunity. If you don't get opportunities, try to find people in the community, whether it's on Twitter or tons of different Slack groups. I guess the biggest thing you can say is throw yourself out there. Don't be afraid of failure, right? I've failed a million times, especially for the longest time being in a network or being in a certain the network security monitoring community, which I came from a networking background. It was always really hard to find people that really wanted to share anything or kind of, I don't know, but eventually that lasted 3 or 4 years, and I started just introducing myself to people on Twitter, hey, can I help you out? Working for free, I guess, in my spare time, with blogging and open source and people on Twitter and GitHub projects was really the biggest thing for me. I worked with smart people, but I never really had a actual technical mentor. So I just kind of went outside myself and I guess just, found it, which is one of my takeaways. If you don't work around smart people, just find them, follow them, whether it's a researcher or blogs, and then you'll be one of the best or better than most if you just do what smart people do. That's really the simplest way I could say it, breaking into cybersecurity, right, is just finding the smart people and doing what they do. Joe Atmon is a jack of all trades, master of none. So really my background, I've done reverse engineering. I've done 40 gigabit per second network security monitoring and kernel tuning, done large database deployments. Incident response, I've fixed a whole lot of printers. I've ran help desk, kind of done everything. But then, I look back 4 years ago, I wrote 15,000 line Python, I guess, script, but I can't write 2 lines of Python anymore. So my career path is a lot of reading. I noticed somebody said like, oh, hey, what's the most amount of hours you've ever worked at one time? I'm not proud of it, but I think it's about 78 hours straight. I think I've worked like 110 hours in 5 days. I've had a year where I've had my hours in for the year by like the month of April. So that's working like 2 times the amount of regular hours. So I've only been in this field or only been in IT for 12 years, but I guess based on time, I have like 20 years of experience. So struggles, yeah, I think my biggest struggle has been realistic risk, or like realistic what's the possibility of going to happen to your organization versus securing everything. I talk about it all the time, but the continued like what matters to your organization, what doesn't matter. Because trying to protect every device just isn't possible. So that was a really like, if you struggle with trying to be a perfectionist or in those sort of things, that was kind of the biggest struggle for me and what helped. Biggest helpers, yeah, I got a lot of people, whether it's Adam, Charlie, Mike, people from Converge or Roberto, so on and so forth. I wouldn't say so many technical people, just kind of the people who give you advice, which is my takeaway. If you're a part of a community, like the least you can do is give a thumbs up on somebody's Slack message. I always go back to like Roberto's threat hunting Slack group. Like he personally, when somebody joins that Slack group, he says like, hi, like that seems minuscule and not like a big deal, but people who are trying to get into a community or learn, like that's a huge thing. Like I know, like one of the top exploit kit researchers, like I think it was 23, but he talked to me on Twitter and that was like a big deal, for me. So when it comes to burnout, I guess you can probably guess I've struggled with that with how many hours I've worked before. But really like a hobby, something outside of that, that you can feel like you accomplished something, right? Like, so I like to build Legos, something I can put on a shelf. I guess my kids could break them, but it's a lot better than, you build an entire database and somebody just decides to unplug it and that's it. Kind of that like sense of worthlessness or not, right? But yeah, that's what I like to do. It's something I can do with my kids, who's over there on the right. Play a lot of video games, sometimes too much, especially now during the Rona. But yeah, I think burnout biggest thing is finding people who care about you, right? Like everybody is going to eventually want something from you. And to find those people is kind of like a mutual relationship. So high profile adversary experience, man. So I spoke to Brian Krebs. I'll kind of just leave it at that. I think I was 24 or 25. I was by myself. No idea how to handle it. I guess I did. But yeah, I had to talk to Brian Krebs. Was quoted in an article, thankfully did not directly say my name, but just say it was one of the largest, related to one of the largest known like government breaches. It was in the private sector, so, but I still don't like to talk about it. But yeah, that's it. And basically being a kid talking to Krebs was fun. So yeah, and I already took care of the next slide, Adam. So
yeah,
takeaways. So.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just go here and see if there's any.
I think we're good on Q&A.
Q&A. Just open Q&A if anyone has.
I'll stay on for a minute.
Would you say that every mistake is just a happy little security incident? I guess you could look at that way. Yeah. Little what's that guy's name? Ross, right? The painter. Yeah. If you make a painting your tree, oh, it's just a happy little tree. Let's see here. Do you think that this was an attack from whatever ABT? They didn't intend to be caught as soon as it did, potentially. Oh yeah, for sure. I don't think this for the Solarwinds compromise, or I don't think they wanted to be caught yet. There was no dump of tools, for instance, and Fireeye hasn't come out and said, like, you know, they defaced our domain controller or walked out our CEO or something like that. So I think, yeah, they meant to maintain their.
Yeah, but this is also the adversary that's really, really good at pivoting or using new infrastructure, new hashes. So I don't know if some of the Fireeye state of security talk about, I don't know personally who this adversary is, but kind of who everybody's leading it on to be. But still, like, once adversary is known that, you know, they're being investigated, or like the network, people in the network are leading on to potential compromise and trying to clean it up, they will, you know, work twice as hard, 3 times as hard around the clock to set up new infrastructure, get back in. So I don't know, maybe. Guess nobody ever wants to get caught, but then again, like, maybe you want to spin up the leading incident response company of the world. I don't know. There's a lot when it comes to disrupting and things like that.
Okay. Then we have a question. What's the log? I'll get it for you here in a second. The specific log. Let's see here. If I can say it out loud here. Come on, where are you? Shucks. Yeah, oh, I don't have it. I don't have it up quickly, but it'll be in the public slides. I'll edit it in there. So take a look, watch it on LinkedIn, or I'll just post it on LinkedIn when the talk is over. Let's see. Yeah, someone says they may have gone after Fireeye, hoping to get caught. I think Nate's take on that is probably more likely, where if they spin up, yeah, I guess it's kind of the same idea, where if they spin up Fireeye, perhaps they'll be able to embed themselves deeper in other companies. All right, so Chuck says, Nate, you're awesome. Thanks, Chuck.
Well, I didn't see that one.
All right, folks, I think we've pretty much run the gamut on all the Q&A. So hope you guys have a nice Christmas holiday if you celebrate, or celebrate whatever holiday is coming up. There's a lot across the world. So have a good weekend as well. Peace.